The entire city seemed to be in motion, but he was still. The horns honked like the hurried drums of a world that had already left behind any trace of compassion. Cars slid down the avenue like snakes of light, indifferent to the small human huddle crouched on the corner of a sidewalk. It was almost invisible, not because it was small, but because no one wanted to see what hurt so much. A thin, skeletal man held two babies, as if holding the last breath of meaning in a world where everything had fallen apart. The cloths that wrapped the children were soaked. Each drop of rain that fell on their bodies seemed like a cruel reminder that the sky sometimes also turns its back. The umbrella in his hand was almost ironic. Cheap plastic torn, tilted by the wind, with no strength to protect. But he held it steady, like someone protecting a sacred object with what little he has left. His bare feet, cracked by the cold in the road, touched the muddy water that ran down the gutter. All around him, the rush. Inside him, a time stopped, a time in which life stopped moving forward. The traffic light blinked between green and red, but the world remained the eternal yellow of indifference. His eyes didn't ask. They begged, but without sound. They were eyes that carried layers of stories that would never be told. Stories of interrupted love, of broken promises, of hands that let go at the wrong time. He didn't hold up signs. He didn't extend his hand. He was just there, present like a forgotten altar, but still sacred. And the babies, oh, the babies slept. They slept not because it was night, but because hunger had already taught them that the body shuts down when there is nothing left to feel. One slept with his mouth half open, sucking in an emptiness. The other kept his eyes half closed, as if watching his father even in his sleep. The flow of people around him was like a river around a rock. They looked away, quickened their pace, rolled down their windows. A boy in the back seat of a car pressed his face against the window and stared. "Mom, why is he there with the babies?" he asked. His mother replied in a dry whisper, "Don't look, my son. They're dangerous." The boy didn't understand, but he kept looking. His father on the sidewalk noticed, and for an instant their eyes met. It was a second, maybe two, but there was something there, something that not even the rain could erase. He gently arranged the wet cloths on his children, as if he were covering with dignity what the world had tried to strip of humanity. He looked up at the sky, not with faith, nor with anger, just with the emptiness of someone who no longer expects an answer. And in that wet silence, where only the sound of the rain and the roar of the engines could be heard, the man took a deep breath. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if each breath were an act of resistance. The night went on, and no one stopped. But there he was, motionless, resilient, invisible. The rain beat down on the cars and sidewalks, but it also beat down on him. It beat down like someone trying to bend a heart that refuses to break. And even without saying a word, his presence screamed. It was a silent scream, the kind of clamor that only those who have suffered too much to ignore the pain of others hear. And then, on the other side of the intersection, through the dark windows of a car that no one noticed, a pair of eyes finally saw. They didn't look. They saw. And in that moment, something began to change. Not in the city, not in time, but in a destiny that refused to die. Before the sidewalk, before the rain, there was a home. It wasn't big nor luxurious, but there was laughter inside. The smell of simple food and the sound of pots banging in the sink mingled with the sound of the oldest daughter's little feet running around the living room. She called him Daddy, with a joy that only children know, as if that name were the safest place in the world. He was a bus driver. He knew every street in the city, every face that came and went. And even when he was tired from the long shifts, he returned home with a full heart, because he knew there was someone waiting for him. But that day, the hospital was silent. The stretcher rolled down the hallway like an omen. His wife, so strong, so smiling, did not return. The child was born. She left. Everything that was whole shattered in a single instant. When the doctor said complications during childbirth, he did not understand. He only felt it. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet, and the world was now a great echo. His second son cried in the arms of a nurse, and he cried inside, trying to be two, father and mother, pain and comfort, man and miracle. What came next was not mourning. It was rejection. Her family, the same ones who had smiled at parties, who had posed for Christmas photos, now blamed him. They said he had taken her too soon, that he should have done more, that he was irresponsible. When he returned home with his two children in his arms, he found the gate closed and the cutting words that still echo. "You are not welcome here." Her house, where they lived, was now a locked silence. Her closets, where her dresses and dreams were kept, were emptied by other hands, and he was left with what no one wanted, her pain and her children. Little by little, his friends disappeared. The messages stopped. The neighbors whispered behind his back. And he just held the two boys tightly, as if holding on to his last chance not to disappear. During the nights, he looked at their makeshift cribs and wondered if he was doing everything wrong. Sometimes he felt guilty for not smiling anymore. Sometimes he felt ashamed to ask for help. And more times than he would like to admit, he felt like disappearing. But he couldn't. Because every time when the babies woke up hungry or scared, he remembered he was all they had. Even broken, he was still a shelter. Even hurt, he was still a father. And it was there, in the emptiness after the loss, that he understood. It wasn't just his wife who had left. His home, his bonds, his trust had also left. Only the road remained. And the road, when it has no end, becomes exile. With the days dragging by like chains on his feet, he put on his strength like someone putting on an old, torn coat. Not because he was ready, but because there was no choice. He strapped his two children to his back, one on each side, tied with improvised cloths that smelled of milk and despair. He walked through the streets with heavy steps, like someone walking against the wind. With each door he slammed, a new wall. With each attempt to start over, a new face that looked at him as if he were less than a man, less than a father, less than human. He went into a small supermarket and asked to unload some goods. The manager looked him up and down and pointed at his children. This isn't a daycare. He tried a workshop. The smell of grease seemed familiar, almost comforting, but the answer was the same. Nobody wants trouble here. The bakery didn't even let him speak. We already have help. And so he was pushed away, not with hands, but with words, with closed doors, with eyes that pass through and don't see. The squares became shelter. The cement benches, the bed, the sky, the roof. The cloths that wrapped the babies now also covered their invisible wound. He learned to sleep in vigil, listening to every sound on the street, as if it were a warning. A louder cry, a strange footstep, a distant siren. And in the midst of it all, he still rocked his children in his arms, softly singing the songs his wife sang, not to make them sleep, but to remind them that love was still there, even buried by so much rejection. The help that came was scarce. A loaf of bread here, a water there. But with each handout came a disguised judgment. Where's the mother? You should give those children away. This is what happens when you have children without thinking. He listened to everything, silently, not out of cowardice, but because he knew that, in order to survive, sometimes you have to swallow even your pride. And he swallowed it. Every word, every look, every no, with his children pressed against his chest. He kept walking, not because he had a destination, but because stopping meant giving up, and he couldn't give up. Not with two hearts beating so close to his. Not while there was even a chance, even a remote one, that someone, just one someone, would look at him and see more than just his appearance. See the truth. See the man. See his father. But so far no one had. The rain continued to fall, as if washing away everything except the pain. The traffic light turned red again, dying the hope that insisted on surviving red. The cars stopped. The horn stopped for a moment. And the world seemed to hold its breath. He was there as always, with his two children in his arms, eyes wet not from the rain, but from something deeper, a hope he no longer knew what to believe in. His feet stuck to the damp ground, his soul floating between despair and surrender. And then the silence broke without a sound. A car stopped right in front of him, black, shiny, so clean that it reflected the dirty street, like a cruel mirror. Nothing moved. For a few seconds, it looked like just another closed window, until, slowly, the window began to descend, not in a hurry, not with fear, but with the strangeness of someone who chooses to see what no one else wants to see. The woman in the back seat was wearing fine clothes, discreet makeup, and a necklace that looked like it was worth more than what he would earn in years, if he still had a job. But what caught the most attention wasn't the adornments. It was her gaze, a long, steady gaze that pierced through the wet cloths, the tired face, and landed directly on what was still human in his eyes. He flinched instinctively, as if expecting yet another judgment, yet another insult, yet another gesture of repulsion. But she didn't talk about the rain. She didn't ask where his mother was. She didn't say, poor thing. She didn't offer coins. She simply held out her hand with a small card, an almost ceremonial gesture, as if handing over a key. Her voice was calm, but it carried something that made time stand still. Go. Now. Trust. Nothing more. Just that. And the window went up again, leaving behind a heavy absence. He stood there, holding the card in his hand and the rein on his shoulders. His children were asleep, and he could feel the paper trembling between his fingers. He didn't know what he had written. He didn't know if it was true, but there was something in that gesture, something that wasn't charity, something that wasn't pity. It was as if, finally, someone had said without words, "I see you," and that was rarer than any fortune, because it wasn't a hand that offered help. It was the look that recognized value. And there, on that sidewalk where everything seemed lost, something whispered inside him. Maybe, just maybe, destiny was about to change direction. The car didn't come back. He went. He didn't know where to. He didn't ask. He walked to the address written on the card, like someone stepping on promises that seemed too good to be true. The rain had already stopped, but the cold remained, and with it, the doubt. Each step was like a stretched thread between the desire to trust and the fear of falling again. When he arrived, he stopped in front of the tall, white gate, surrounded by silence. There were no signs. There was no notice, only an intercom that sounded low when he pressed it. The door opened slowly, without any question. A woman, not the one in the car, welcomed him with a look that didn't smile, but didn't judge either. She simply nodded and let him in. He entered with his children clutched tightly in his arms, his eyes restless, as those of a wounded animal crossing the threshold of an unknown cave. Inside, the house was large. It smelled clean, of light perfume and fresh bread. The floor gleamed, the furniture shone. The walls were painted with peaceful landscapes. But inside, everything was still noise. The woman pointed to a room. She said he could rest there, that there were clean clothes, food, and a warm bed. He went in, but didn't touch anything. The children were gently placed on a bed, and they slept like someone who has finally found the peace that only exists when the body no longer needs to fight. He, however, remained standing. His gaze swept every corner. His breathing was shallow, his soul on guard. The bed seemed like a trap. The food, a test. The comfort, a threat. Because someone who has been thrown out so many times no longer knows how to accept shelter without fear. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just waited. He waited for the blow. He waited for the charge. He waited for the disguised humiliation. But nothing came. Only silence. A soft silence that wrapped him like a mother's old blanket. And then, for the first time in a long time, he closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to try to believe that maybe it was an illusion, that maybe, just maybe, that house, smelling of lavender and bread, wasn't a trap, but rather a new beginning, even though he still didn't know how to believe it. The next day, the sun shone through the windows with gentleness that seemed to ask permission. The twins woke up first, their eyes still curious, but now without the tremor of the cold. They played with their hands, touching the sheets as if discovering a new world. He watched, still in silence, still unable to believe it. The door opened with a soft sound, almost an invitation, and then she came in, the woman from the car, the billionaire. But at that moment, without the evening dress, without makeup, without jewelry, just a woman, with eyes of someone who has already carried too much weight. She didn't introduce herself with titles. She didn't tell him her fortune. She sat at the table with a cup of tea and simply said, "Can I tell you something?" He nodded, not out of politeness, but out of cautious curiosity, and she began. She told him that years ago she had been in the same position, pregnant, homeless, rejected. She told him that she had slept on sidewalks where she now drives, that she had eaten bread that others had dropped, that she had cried for fear of not being able to protect the child growing inside her, and that, even so, she had not given up. She said that one night, someone saw her, someone who didn't want to know about the past, but wanted to offer her a future. And it was that gesture, simple, firm, silent, that changed everything. She didn't want to tell that story, not because she was ashamed, but because, until that moment, she had never met anyone who carried in their eyes the same wounded courage that she once saw in the mirror. "I saw you there in the rain, and I remember myself. I couldn't pass by without doing anything. I couldn't let my children learn so early the taste of abandonment." He didn't answer, but something inside him that had been closed for a long time opened. It wasn't gratitude, nor relief. It was recognition. For the first time, someone wasn't just helping him. They were understanding him. Someone who knew what it was like to fight without applause, to fall without outstretched hand, to keep going even without knowing why. In that clean room, in that whispered conversation, something invisible was sealed. It wasn't a favor. It was an encounter of two broken stories that, when they crossed paths, began to mend. Together, the weeks that followed were not easy, but they were different. For the first time in a long time, he woke up without fear of being kicked out. His children ate, laughed, slept with their heads resting peacefully on their pillows. And he relearned how to exist, not as a burden, not as a mistake, but as a man who could still build. The billionairess didn't push him. She didn't give orders. She just opened paths. And it was on one of those paths, at the bottom of the yard of the house where he now lived, that he found old boards, hammers, pieces that would abandon like abandoned waste. It started without intention. He cut, sanded, and nailed. His hands, accustomed to holding steering wheels and children, now molded new shapes. He made a wooden horse, then a small giraffe. The smell of sawdust permeated his clothes, his skin, but mainly his spirit. It was as if with each chip removed, he was also tearing out what was left of the pain. The toys were not perfect, but they had souls. The children of the house ran to see them, and when his children held one in their hands, there was a different glow, the one that only appears when father not only protects, but raises with love. The billionaire saw, and she saw more than just transformed wood. She saw a man who did not give in, a father who, even when injured, did not let go of his children. He ordered a small, simple studio to be built in the back, with a table, tools, and light. He simply said, "Do what your heart knows how to do." And he did it, not in a hurry, not to prove anything. He did it like someone planting in new soil, but with deep roots. And the neighborhood began to notice. First, one order, then two. Then a school wanted toys for the community daycare. And he delivered everything with a discreet smile without boasting. Because what he did was not about fame. It was about dignity. People began to ask, "Who is this man?" And the answers came with respect. "He is the father of the twins." That was what they called him, not because of what he had lost, but because of what he had done with what was left. And each toy that left the studio carried a little of this story, a little of the pain overcome, a little of the love that endured. He did not become famous. He became necessary. He became an example. And without realizing it, he built much more than toys. He built a new name for himself, a name that his children now pronounce with pride. It was a morning like so many others, but something in the breeze seemed different. The car moved slowly along the streets he knew all too well, not by the names of the avenues, but by the hidden corners of pain between the streetlights. In the back seat, the twins, now older, laughed at the toy he had made. In the rear-view mirror, that father's eyes saw more than the traffic. They saw the road travel with bare steps and the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. He was dressed in a new uniform, his name embroidered on his chest, his pride sewn between the threads. The car stopped at the same traffic light. The same traffic light that once saw him hunched over in the rain. The sidewalk seemed smaller now, but the scent of memory still lived there. He looked, like someone returning to the place of a fall, to thank their own scar. And then he saw it. Another man, another child, a plastic tarp covering little, a look that asked, like as once asked, without sound, without fury, only with the desperate silence of someone still waiting to be seen. Without thinking, he parked. He got out with firm steps. The city kept running, but for him, everything stopped. He walked up to the man and stood face to face, eye to eye. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't ask what happened. He simply took off his coat and held it out to him. "It's cold today." The man hesitated. Then he took it. His children from the car watched, not with pity, with understanding. They knew, deep down, that this gesture was more than just help. It was a mirror restoring dignity to the world. The father returned to the car in silence, but inside, a flame was lit, because in that simple act, there was more than compassion. There was continuity. There was a legacy. He did not forget where he came from. He did not deny what he was. And when he returned to the sidewalk, now with shoes on his feet, he showed that the true return is not to repeat the pain. It is to heal where it once hurt. There, where the city turned its face, someone looked, and hope walked the streets again, disguised in gesture, silent like faith, and as firm as a father who never gave up. The shelter was born without fanfare. First, a simple tent on a forgotten plot of land. Then, a roof made of reclaimed wood, low benches, walls painted with drawings made by the children themselves. It was not an orphanage. It was not a social project. It was a gesture, A place for parents who, like he once was, carried children in their arms and questions in their hearts. A space where no one asked where's mom, but rather, how can we help? Where handmade toys shared space with stories told in the shade of trees. Where pain was not denied, but welcomed. He called it planting time, because he knew that those who plant with care reap dignity. And because he knew, with every fiber of his body marked by struggle, that no one rises alone. He taught carpentry, but he also taught listening. He served coffee, but he also served memory. It was there, among boards and paint, that many parents relearned how to embrace their children with less fear and more presence. And the children ran, laughed, fell, and got up as it should be. One late afternoon, when the clouds weighed down the sky with promises of a storm, the twins went out to play. They were no longer babies. They were no longer afraid of the rain. They ran through the puddles, arms open, laughter flowing. He watched them from the porch. The sound of the water hitting the roof no longer brought back memories of pain. It brought relief. It was as if nature itself was saying, everything is okay now. And for the first time, he let the tears flow unhurriedly, without shame. It wasn't regret. It was gratitude. The last scene was silent. He walked down the steps, walked into the rain, and raised his face to the sky. He felt every drop as a blessing. And there, standing, with his children wet and happy, he said in a low voice, almost like a prayer, "In the rain I got lost, but it was in the rain that God found me." And finally he smiled, not because everything was resolved, but because he had become a shelter. And those who become shelter never return to being just memories. They become seeds. They become beacons. They become solid ground for new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive more stories of faith, overcoming and starting over like this one. Leave your like. It shows that we still believe in the power of compassion. Comment below what this journey awakened in you, and share with someone who needs to remember, even in the rain, a new path can be born.